Across Israel, protesters are growing louder. Those frustrated by the war are now grappling with how to make their voices heard. CNN's Melissa Bell has more.
In Israel, too, there are those who object to their government's handling of the war in Gaza. Among them, Ben Arad, who as an 18-year-old is due to enlist this week for his mandatory military service. Instead, he tells the crowd he's choosing to go to jail. We caught up with him in Tel Aviv on his very last day of freedom.
I don't refuse because I'm afraid of being hurt or killed in military action. I have a very, very deep disgust of the things that I'm seeing happening.
Things, he says, that Israeli media doesn't dwell on, but that he seeks out on international networks and online.
I think something that really broke my heart was the flower massacre. So seeing people trample each other to get food, I mean, you just can't deny at that point that there is a famine going on and people are hungry.
So on Monday, Ben will hand himself in, becoming one of only a handful of so-called refuseniks to make their decisions public since the war began. In a country where military service marks the start of every Israeli's grown-up life, aside from those exempt on religious grounds, the war has made avoiding it a political act.
I've been called a traitor. I've been told that I need to be deported, or I've been asked why I don't just move. I mean, but it's not such terrible stuff. I haven't gotten that yet. Like, I'll get that when I go to jail.
Yet Ben says he's determined to give up his freedom in order to remain free of a war that he simply doesn't believe in. Now, it's difficult to overstate what a remarkable decision it is for an Israeli 18-year-old to decide not to serve, given the place that military service has in this country, but especially at this time. I think listening to the testimonies that you were just hearing there, Brianna and Boris, that you just heard from that doctor, remember that international networks like CNN can't get into Gaza, but do what they can to try and show what's happening to Palestinian civilians. That he's had to seek out that information to make his decision, I think, is interesting in itself. One media analyst pointing out that here in Israel, the drums of war have been beating so loudly that it's been hard for the Israeli public to get access through its own media to much of what's happening to Palestinian civilians. So a remarkable story at a remarkable time, and bear in mind that we are now in the third day of 4 days of protest against this war here in Jerusalem. Boris and Brianna.
Yeah, a really fascinating perspective from that young man. Melissa Bell, live for us in Jerusalem. Thank you so much.
All right, in terms of what else is happening on the ground in Gaza, what was once the enclave's largest hospital, really a place of hope and healing, is now permanently out of service. That's according to the acting director of the Al-Shifa Medical Complex.
Yeah, the hospital has turned into a makeshift graveyard one day after Israeli troops ended their 2-week siege there. The World Health Organization says Al-Shifa is in ruins and can no longer be able to function in any way as a hospital. Now, these before and after images show the extent of the destruction. A WHO spokesperson says that the loss of the hospital will have devastating consequences for the people of Gaza.
We've had contact with the staff. The directors told us that Al-Shifa Hospital is gone. Destroying Al-Shifa means ripping the heart out of the health system. It was the tertiary care centre. It was a huge hospital, 750 beds, 25 operating theatres, 30 intensive care rooms. You know, it was the place people go to for the kind of care that a really good health system provides, that we in all our societies expect to have should we be in need.
Now, Israel has described the 14-day raid as an anti-terror mission, and a government spokesperson is referring to the operation as the gold standard of urban warfare.
I believe that the terrorist takeover of Shifa and the subsequent Special Forces operation to clear the hospital of terrorists will be studied by future generations of military strategists at West Point and Sandhurst as the gold standard for urban warfare.
But our next guest says the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza has killed more children, more women, doctors, aid workers and journalists than any other war in our time. Jan Englund is the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He joins us live now from Oslo, Norway. Jan, I want to start obviously by talking about what happened with the World Central Kitchen aid workers, seven of them rather tragically killed. Clearly, it is part of the calculation, right, of aid organizations when you are entering into a war zone that there is some degree of risk. But there are also certain things that these organizations often do to mitigate the risks. They coordinated with the IDF. The IDF knew their coordinates. They were in a vehicle that was clearly marked with World Central Kitchen's logo. A lot of people are asking themselves, how on earth could this have happened? I mean, I'm not really sure what else they could have done to really mitigate the risks here. I just want to start by getting your reaction to what happened.
I think our colleagues in World Central Kitchen did everything that they could to be safe in a war zone, helping the children and the women and the innocent with food. And the Israelis that deliberately targeted these three vehicles, we do not believe that they wanted to attack World Central Kitchen, with whom they had worked a lot in previous operations to reach people in Gaza, but they deliberately and repeatedly targeted these three vehicles. So it's very clear that they are again and again and again targeting without knowing who's inside. And therefore, it's the worst casualty of any war in recent memory in terms of women, children, the innocent, the aid workers, the doctors, the nurses, the teachers, any group that have protection under international law. And it's not the gold standard of good warfare. This is a race to the bottom, and it's happening with American, German, and other Western arms.
Jan, in response to this tragic strike, the Israeli defense minister said that Israel would open a joint situation room with international groups to enable coordination of aid distribution in Gaza with the military. Now, aside from a ceasefire, which of course would require both sides to agree and for Hamas to also release hostages, do you think this is the right next step in terms of rebuilding trust and getting more aid, much more needed aid, into Gaza, given the dire situation now? And you have the World Central Kitchen understandably saying they're going to suspend their work there following this tragedy.
They will, and other groups, including my own, have said we will not send convoys north at this time because they are so often targeted by the Israeli war machine. If they now will have a deconfliction system, a notification system with international staff embedded in the Israeli military high command, it would be a step in the right direction. I've been an aid worker in many war zones, and we had a system in Afghanistan with U.S. military in the when the U.S. was there in the Afghan military high command, and that worked pretty well. We had even in the 2006 war in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah, we had UN staff in the Israeli high command. We haven't had that in the Gaza war, and partly therefore, I think there hasn't been a deconfliction system, a notification system that has protected aid workers. However, we need really more than anything else a ceasefire so that this senseless blood shedding can stop. And the second thing we need is all of the border crossings, including those in the north, that Israel has shut down so that we cannot reach civilians in a safe way. We need those border crossings to open.